Everyone avoided the human man, but the most beautiful alien queen in the galaxy chose to sit with him. Daniel had learned over the course of his 3 months as Ambassador Reeves's assistant that there were exactly 47 ways to be ignored at a diplomatic function. He'd cataloged them all in a small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket, right next to the emergency and tacit tablets that had become his constant companion since joining the Intergalactic Diplomatic Corps. Number 12 was happening right now, the strategic buffet pivot. He'd been attempting to introduce himself to a cluster of Azurian delegates, crystalline beings who refracted light into dizzying patterns, when the tallest one had suddenly become intensely fascinated by a platter of photon-glazed appetizers. The others had followed suit, creating a wall of rainbow-refracting backs that left Daniel talking to empty air. He retreated with as much dignity as he could muster, which wasn't much. The Cloud Palace's main banquet hall stretched before him like something out of a fever dream, engineered by a particularly ambitious architect with access to technology that laughed at physics. The ceiling soared overhead, easily 200 meters high, adorned with holographic constellations that shifted and pulsed. Real stars, he'd been told, captured in temporal loops and projected for aesthetic purposes. The floor beneath his feet was transparent in sections, offering vertiginous glimpses of the cloud layer far below, where lightning storms played out in slow motion, their fury muted by distance and atmospheric filters. The palace itself hung suspended in the upper atmosphere of Nefara, held aloft by gravitational anchors that the original builders had installed millennia ago. No one quite remembered how they worked anymore, which Daniel found deeply unsettling every time he thought about it. The whole structure could theoretically plummet into the ocean at any moment, but everyone acted like this was perfectly normal. Perhaps when you'd been traveling between stars for centuries, the idea of a floating palace became mundane. Daniel's assigned table lurked in the far corner of the hall, tucked behind a decorative fountain that generated water from atmospheric moisture and cycled it through shapes that defied geometry. He'd watched it for 20 minutes earlier, trying to understand how liquid could form a Klein bottle, before deciding that some mysteries were better left unexplored. The table's location spoke volumes about Earth's current standing in galactic society, visible enough to claim they'd been included, remote enough that everyone could pretend they hadn't noticed. He sat down and examined his plate, which had been filled by robotic attendants that looked like floating spheres of mercury. The food was supposed to be synthesized to match human nutritional requirements, but the kitchen AI had apparently decided that Earth cuisine meant vaguely chicken-shaped protein in suspicious gravy. Daniel poked it with his fork. It jiggled in a way that food probably shouldn't. His translator earpiece crackled with fragments of nearby conversations. The device was a marvel of xenolinguistic engineering, capable of processing over 14,000 languages in real time, but it had an unfortunate tendency to pick up and translate everything within a 20-meter radius. He heard a Vex general discussing trade routes through the Kepler corridor, her chitinous mandibles clicking in a rhythm the translator rendered as mild annoyance. 2 tables over, a delegation from the Ephemera Collective, beings of living gas contained in shimmering probability fields, were debating the philosophical implications of the summit's seating arrangements. Their voices came through as whispers layered over whispers, like wind through a canyon that had learned to speak. No one was talking to him. No one was even looking in his direction. Daniel pulled out his flask, a gift from his predecessor, who'd lasted exactly 6 weeks before requesting a transfer to the Titan Agricultural Station, and added a generous splash of whiskey to what the menu claimed was coffee. The liquid accepted the addition with an ominous hiss and turned a shade of purple that nature had never intended. This was his life now. He dreamed of the stars since childhood, devoured every book about first contact and interstellar diplomacy he could find, aced every exam at the academy, and now he sat alone in the corner of the most important gathering in the sector, drinking purple coffee whiskey while the galaxy's power brokers pretended Earth didn't exist. A server bot drifted past, its anti-grav field humming softly. Daniel flagged it down and pointed at his protein blob. Is this supposed to be moving on its own? The bot's optical sensors focused on the plate, After a moment of processing, it replied in a cheerful, synthesized voice, "That is within acceptable parameters for semi-living nutritional substrates. Would you like us to terminate it more thoroughly?" "You know what? Never mind. I've lost my appetite anyway." The bot floated away, probably relieved to return to serving delegates who didn't ask uncomfortable questions about their food's vital status. Daniel slumped in his chair and watched the crowd. The hall was packed with representatives from hundreds of worlds, a kaleidoscope of forms and faces that would have sent his younger self into paroxysms of joy. There were the Vex with their armored bodies and compound eyes, the Azurians refracting light into personal rainbows, the Melodians whose very bodies produced harmonics that made his bones vibrate pleasantly. He even spotted a Quarzan ambassador, a being of pure crystallized thought housed in a containment sphere, communicating through mathematical equations that appeared as floating symbols above its spherical form. And then there was him, human, bipedal, embarrassingly organic, wearing a suit that had been cutting-edge fashion on Earth but looked hopelessly primitive next to the flowing quantum fabric robes and adaptive armor everyone else sported. He was reaching for his flask again when the music stopped. The Melodian Orchestra, living instruments that produce sounds through biological processes Daniel didn't want to examine too closely, fell silent mid-phrase. The sudden absence of sound was so complete that Daniel heard his own heartbeat, amplified by the hall's perfect acoustics. Every head turned toward the entrance. Daniel looked up and forgot how to breathe. The grand entrance to the banquet hall was framed by an archway that supposedly contained fragments of a collapsed star, held in temporal stasis so they'd glow with eternal blue-white light without incinerating everyone in a 50-kilometer radius. Daniel had stopped questioning these things. When you worked in intergalactic diplomacy, you either accepted that physics was more like physics-adjacent guidelines, or you went quietly insane. Queen Vivian stepped through that archway, and Daniel understood why entire star systems had reportedly gone to war over marriage proposals she'd declined. She moved like gravity had made a personal exception for her, each step a careful negotiation between floating and walking. Her silks, and Daniel was pretty sure they were actual silk, not the quantum weave stuff everyone else wore, caught the light in ways that shouldn't be possible with normal fabric. The material shifted through colors that his eyes struggled to process, settling somewhere between deep crimson and liquid sunset. Against this, her skin was a vibrant red that reminded him of nebula photographs, rich and warm, and utterly unlike anything Earth's limited palette had produced. But it was her face that held him. Even from across the massive hall, he could see the elegant line of her jaw, the serene expression that suggested she'd walked into throne rooms and war councils and black holes with the same unshakable calm. And rising from her dark hair, which fell in waves past her shoulders, were her ears, long and gracefully pointed, sweeping up and back like wings carved from living flesh. They moved slightly as she walked, responding to sounds Daniel couldn't hear, giving her an otherworldly quality that transcended mere alien biology. Her honor guard followed 2 paces behind, 7 warriors in silver armor that hummed with defensive fields. Their presence only emphasized how little she actually needed protection. Power radiated from her like heat from a star. Daniel's translator earpiece exploded with whispered commentary from every direction. The Azurians were refracting light in patterns that apparently indicated extreme approval. The Vex general's mandibles were clicking in what the translator interpreted as reverent appreciation mixed with territorial concern. Someone from the Ephemera Collective was murmuring something about gravitational anomalies in local space-time consistent with concentrated charisma fields. His own reaction was considerably simpler. His brain had apparently decided to reboot, leaving him staring like a teenager who'd just discovered the concept of beauty. "Close your mouth, son," Ambassador Reeves muttered, appearing suddenly at Daniel's elbow. The older man had mastered the diplomatic skill of materializing exactly when you least wanted him around. "You're representing Earth. Try not to look like you've been hit with a stunner." Daniel's jaw clicked shut. Is that actually Queen Vivian? In the flesh. Try not to stare. She's allied with the Combine, which means we smile politely and stay out of her way. Reeves adjusted his ceremonial sash, which had been printed with Earth's flag in colors that somehow looked faded even when new. Last thing we need is to give anyone the impression that Earth is punching above its diplomatic weight class. Right, Daniel managed. Punching. Weight class. Got it. Reeves clapped him on the shoulder and drifted away, probably to corner some minor trade official from a system that wouldn't immediately ignore him. Daniel returned his attention to Queen Vivian, who was surveying the room with an expression of careful neutrality. The crowd had arranged itself into a receiving line without anyone actually organizing it, the way water finds its level or politicians find cameras. The Azurian chancellor stood at the front, his crystalline body polished to maximum reflectivity. Behind him, the ephemera prime minister had increased their density to something approaching solid, taking on a more defined humanoid shape that probably took considerable effort to maintain. The Vex general was preening her antennae, which Daniel's cultural briefing had mentioned was the equivalent of straightening your tie. Everyone wanted to be noticed. Everyone had prepared their most charming greeting, their most politically advantageous opening line. Daniel could see it in their postures, hear it in the way conversations had died throughout the hall. Queen Vivian took 3 steps into the room and stopped. Her long ears tilted forward slightly, as if she were listening to something beyond normal hearing. Then she began walking again, and Daniel felt the crowd's confusion ripple outward, like waves from a stone dropped in still water. She wasn't heading toward the Azurian chancellor. She stepped smoothly past him, ignoring his hastily prepared bow. The ephemera prime minister solidified further in anticipation, but she glided past them too. The Vex general's antennae drooped in disappointment. Daniel watched her progress with the detached interest of someone who knew the show had nothing to do with him. She was probably heading for the high table, where Supreme Coordinator Thex held court surrounded by the real power brokers. Or maybe toward the diplomatic cluster near the central fountain, where trade agreements worth more than Earth's entire GDP were being negotiated over drinks that cost more than his annual salary. She walked straight down the center of the hall. Delegates pressed themselves against walls and pillars, creating a corridor of stunned silence. Daniel's translator was going haywire, picking up confused murmurs in dozens of languages, all asking the same question. Where was she going? It wasn't until she was maybe 20 meters away that a small panicked voice in the back of Daniel's mind suggested something impossible. 15 meters. His heart began doing something irregular that probably warranted medical attention. 10 meters. He looked behind him, certain there must be someone important he'd somehow missed. There was only the geometric fountain and a potted plant from Verdania that was either decorative or possibly sentient. The briefing had been unclear. 5 meters. Daniel half stood, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed thunderously loud in the silence. His brain was throwing error messages, unable to reconcile what his eyes were seeing with any rational explanation. 3 meters. Queen Vivian's expression remained serene, but he caught the faintest hint of amusement in her eyes, which he now saw were a deep amber color that seemed to hold flecks of gold. She stopped at his table. Daniel realized he was holding his breath. Somewhere in the distance, he heard what might have been Ambassador Reeves choking on his drink. Queen Vivian's long ears tilted forward slightly, focusing on him with an attention that made him feel simultaneously visible and transparent. When she spoke, her voice was like music played on an instrument he'd never heard but immediately loved. "May I join you?" Daniel's mouth opened, but his brain had apparently filed for emergency leave. What came out was something between a word and the sound a deflating air mattress might make. He tried again. Yes, Your Majesty? Please?" Vivian smiled and settled into the chair across from him with a kind of effortless grace that probably required years of royal training or possibly some kind of anti-gravity assist built into her clothing. Daniel wouldn't put it past galactic nobility to cheat at sitting down. Her long ears caught the light from the holographic constellations overhead, giving them an almost translucent quality, like stained glass windows that had decided to grow on the side of someone's head. The silence in the hall was so complete that Daniel could hear the atmospheric processors humming in the walls. Thousands of eyes were boring into his back. He could feel the weight of their stares like physical pressure, pressing down on his shoulders. Somewhere behind him, he heard what sounded like Ambassador Reeves having a minor medical event. "You're probably wondering why," Vivian said, folding her hands on the table. Her fingers were long and elegant, adorned with rings that seemed to contain miniature nebulae, swirling in endless loops. Daniel laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that he tried to swallow halfway through and ended up choking on. "Wondering? No, I've completely figured it out. This is obviously a stress hallucination brought on by 3 months of diplomatic rejection and too much coffee that's technically classified as a mild poison on 6 different worlds." Her smile widened, reaching her eyes. "I assure you I'm quite real, though I appreciate your dedication to finding rational explanations for irrational situations. It's refreshingly scientific." "Scientific," Daniel repeated, his brain slowly coming back online. "Right. The scientific explanation for why the most powerful woman in the sector just sat down with a junior assistant from a species most people here consider one step above domesticated livestock." "3 steps, actually," Vivian said. "I attended the last Xenobiological Classification Summit. Earth humans were upgraded to emerging sentience with potential for future relevance. You should be proud. My species got a participation trophy. I'll alert the media." She laughed then, and it wasn't the careful, measured laugh he'd expected from royalty. It was genuine and warm, and made her ears tilt back slightly in what he was beginning to recognize as pleasure. "I like you already. You're the first person all day who hasn't tried to impress me with rehearsed flattery or strategic conversation openers." Daniel glanced around at the frozen crowd. The Azurian chancellor had rotated to face them, his crystalline body reflecting light in what might have been confusion or possibly rage. Daniel's briefing on Azurian emotional indicators had been less than thorough. "To be fair, I'm pretty sure I've impressed everyone here, just not in the way anyone wanted." A server bot drifted over, wobbling slightly as if uncertain whether approaching this table was a good career move for an artificial intelligence. It hovered between them, optical sensors flickering nervously. Would your Majesty care for refreshment? What's he having?" Vivian nodded toward Daniel's purple coffee whiskey abomination. "Regret, mostly," Daniel said, with notes of poor life choices and a finish of career suicide. The bot's processors whirred. The beverage is listed as coffee analog with ethanol additive, though current composition has deviated significantly from baseline parameters due to— "I'll have what he's having," Vivian said. The bot froze, its anti-grav field stuttering. "Your Majesty, I must inform you that this beverage is not recommended for consumption by— I've negotiated peace treaties with the Void Collective while drinking fermented methane. I think I can handle whatever Earth's created." She waved a hand dismissively, and the bot fled with what Daniel could only describe as robotic relief. He stared at her. "You're actually going to drink that? I'm pretty sure it's achieved sentience and is plotting revenge. I've survived 7 assassination attempts, 2 of which involved exotic poisons. If this kills me, at least it'll be memorable." She leaned forward slightly and Daniel caught a scent like ozone and flowers he couldn't name. "Now, shall we discuss why everyone's pretending not to watch us while absolutely watching us? I assume that was normal for you, the being watched thing. Constantly, but usually people have the decency to be subtle about it. The Vex General over there is literally vibrating with curiosity. I can hear her carapace rattling from here." Vivian's ears swiveled slightly, tracking sounds Daniel couldn't begin to perceive. "Your ambassador is having what I believe humans call a conniption fit. Should we be concerned?" Daniel risked a glance back. Ambassador Reeves had gone the color of beets and was being supported by 2 concerned Melodian diplomats, whose harmonic frequencies had shifted into what his translator rendered as extreme secondhand stress. "He'll be fine. Probably. Maybe. I should update my resume either way." The server bot returned, moving with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb. It placed 2 cups on the table, the liquid inside them shifting through colors like a mood ring having an identity crisis. Vivian picked up her cup and examined it with the same careful attention she probably gave to interstellar treaties. "To new friends," she said, raising it slightly. "To unemployment and the heat death of my diplomatic career," Daniel replied, but he clinked his cup against hers anyway. They drank. The liquid hit Daniel's tongue like a chemical weapon, having second thoughts about its life choices. Vivian's expression remained completely neutral for exactly 3 seconds before her eyes widened slightly. "That's," she started. "Horrible?" Daniel offered. "I was going to say apocalyptic, but horrible works too." She set the cup down carefully, as if afraid sudden movements might provoke it. "I think it just tried to negotiate a ceasefire with my digestive system. Welcome to Earth cuisine. We've been perfecting the art of making food regret existing for thousands of years." Her laugh came again, and Daniel felt something in his chest unclench. Around them, he could sense the crowd's confusion deepening. This wasn't how interactions with Queen Vivian were supposed to go. There should be formal protocols, careful diplomatic dance, strategic positioning for advantage. Instead, they were joking about terrible coffee while the galaxy watched in baffled silence. Vivian's ears tilted forward, focusing entirely on him. "So, Daniel? It is Daniel, yes? I did my research. Tell me something true. Why are you really here?" Daniel blinked at the question, caught off guard by its directness. In 3 months of diplomatic functions, no one had asked him anything true. They'd asked for documents, for coffee, for him to move out of the way, but nothing that required actual honesty. "You did research on me," he managed. "I'm not sure whether to be flattered or terrified." "Both is acceptable," Vivian said, her amber eyes glinting with amusement. "I make it a policy to know who's attending these summits. You'd be surprised how many wars start because someone didn't do their homework. I once started a minor diplomatic incident because I didn't know the Viridian gesture for hello is identical to their gesture for your mother is a photosynthetic parasite. So yes, I believe you." Her ears tilted back, and what he was learning meant delight. "I heard about that. The Viridian ambassador nearly challenged you to ritual combat." In my defense, the cultural briefing packet was very poorly organized. The important gestures were on page 47, buried between traditional breakfast foods and mating rituals we're not supposed to ask about. Daniel paused. "Also, why did you hear about that? That was on a minor trade station 3 sectors away." "I told you, I do my research. Plus, the Viridian ambassador is my cousin's husband's sister's. Actually, I'm not sure what the exact relation is. Galactic nobility has family trees that look more like family fractals." She waved a hand, rings glinting. "But you're deflecting. I asked why you're really here." Daniel looked down at his toxic coffee, watching the liquid swirl with what might have been its own weather patterns. "Honestly, I wanted to see the stars. I grew up in Cleveland, which has exactly one thing going for it, a really excellent planetarium. I used to skip school and sit there for hours, watching the projections of distant galaxies. The guide would give this speech about how humanity was taking its first steps into a larger universe. And I'd think, I want to be part of that." "And now you are?" Vivian said softly. "Now I'm sitting in the corner of parties while people pretend I don't exist, carrying documents for a man who introduces me as the human, and drinking beverages that violate 3 different conventions on chemical warfare." He laughed without humor. "Turns out the larger universe thinks we're adorable at best and irritating at worst. Like puppies that learn to use tools but haven't quite figured out not to pee on the furniture." That's a very specific metaphor. The ephemera ambassador used it last week. My translator rendered it as charming primitives with hygiene challenges. But I got the subtext. Vivian was quiet for a moment, her long ears swiveling slightly as if listening to the currents of sound around them. The hall had returned to a low murmur, conversations resuming in careful tones. People were still watching, but trying to appear as if they weren't. The Azurian chancellor had turned back to his delegation, but kept rotating slightly every few seconds, like a lighthouse with anxiety. "I read your paper," Vivian said finally, "the one on quantum displacement theory applied to diplomatic relations, published in the Journal of Theoretical Xenopolitics 3 months ago." Daniel's head snapped up. "You read that?" "I didn't think anyone read that. The journal has a circulation of maybe 200 beings, most of whom are tenured professors who hate new ideas. 201, apparently. I found it fascinating. The idea that diplomatic relationships exist in superposition until observed, and that the act of negotiation collapses possibility waves into actual treaties. Her eyes were bright with genuine interest, though I thought your conclusion was overly pessimistic. The conclusion that most diplomatic efforts fail because parties collapse into their predetermined positions before any real negotiation occurs? That one, yes. You implied that meaningful change is nearly impossible once observation begins. She leaned forward, her silk shifting colors from crimson to deep gold. But what if the act of observation itself could be changed? What if instead of collapsing into expected positions, we chose to observe differently? Daniel felt his brain shifting gears, moving from social panic into the familiar territory of theoretical debate. You're suggesting that the observer effect in diplomacy is mutable? That we can choose which version of reality we collapse into? I'm suggesting that right now everyone in this hall is observing us through their predetermined expectations. They see the powerful queen and the insignificant human. But what if we choose to observe something else? What if we collapse into a different reality entirely? Daniel paused, working through the implications. That's either brilliant or completely insane. In my experience, those categories have significant overlap. She picked up her cup again, grimaced at the contents, and set it back down. Want to hear something funny? I chose to sit with you precisely because everyone was ignoring you. That's a terrible reason to make someone the center of galactic attention. Is it? Look around. Half the delegations here want something from me. Trade agreements, military alliances, marriage proposals for their various offspring. The Azurian Chancellor has 3 sons he's been trying to arrange meetings about for the last decade. The Vex General wants me to support her territorial claim in the Kepler Corridor. Even the Ephemera Collective, who claim to have transcended material desires, have been angling for access to the Vivaldi jump gates. Daniel glanced around the hall, seeing it suddenly through her eyes. Every smile, every careful positioning, every strategic conversation, all of it oriented around gaining advantage. Must be exhausting. You have no idea. 2 centuries of this, and I've gotten very good at reading intentions. Everyone broadcasts what they want so loudly I can barely hear anything else. Her ears tilted toward him. Except you. You were sitting here alone, not even looking at me when I entered. Do you know how rare that is? I was looking at you, Daniel protested. I definitely was. My brain just temporarily stopped working. But you weren't calculating how to use me. You weren't preparing your approach, rehearsing your pitch, planning your advantage. You were just existing, being genuine. She smiled, and there was something almost sad in it. Authenticity is the rarest resource in the galaxy. I'd trade a dozen star systems for 5 minutes of honest conversation. Pretty sure I can manage 5 minutes. After that, I'll probably say something accidentally offensive and start another diplomatic incident. I'm counting on it, Vivian said. Perfection is boring. I want to talk to someone real. A chime sounded through the hall, 3 crystalline notes that made the air vibrate. Daniel's translator identified it as the call to dinner, though dinner was a loose term for what was about to happen. The Cloud Palace kitchens employed molecular gastronomists from 40 different worlds, each determined to prove their cuisine's superiority through increasingly elaborate presentations. Around them, delegates began moving toward their assigned seats. Daniel saw Ambassador Reeves gesturing frantically from across the hall, making urgent, "get over here" motions that Daniel pretended not to notice. Vivian followed his gaze and laughed. I think your ambassador wants you. He wants to lock me in a supply closet until you leave, probably. Would you rather join him or stay here and help me survive the next 4 courses of whatever molecular nightmares they've prepared? Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, the most powerful woman in the sector, asking him to stay. Around them, he could feel the weight of hundreds of stares, the press of galactic attention. I should warn you, he said, I have absolutely no idea which fork to use for trans-dimensional soup. Her smile was radiant. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. The first course arrived on plates that hovered 3 centimeters above the table, rotating slowly while emitting a soft, harmonic hum. Daniel stared at what appeared to be a small geometric shape suspended in a bubble of something that might have been gelatin or possibly a contained singularity. The briefing had mentioned that Cloud Palace cuisine emphasized presentation over edibility, which he now understood was diplomatic language for, "Good luck figuring out what this is." "Any theories?" Vivian asked, examining her own hovering plate with the careful attention of someone defusing a bomb. "I think it's food," Daniel offered. 70% sure. There's a non-zero chance it's a decorative centerpiece that's going to judge us for trying to eat it." A melodeon server materialized beside their table, their body producing subtle harmonics that Daniel's translator rendered as refined condescension. The first course is a crystallized moment of sunrise from Phosphorus 7, suspended in essence of temporal flux and garnished with the concept of citrus. Daniel and Vivian stared at the server, then at each other, then back at the server. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "Did you just say we're eating a concept?" "The concept of citrus, yes. The chef found that actual citrus was too pedestrian for an event of this magnitude." The server glided away before either of them could formulate a response. Daniel prodded his geometric shape with a fork. It chimed softly and rotated faster. "I think I offended it," he said. "Cooking has gotten very abstract since the Melodians joined the Culinary Federation," Vivian said. "Last year's summit featured a 7-course meal where every dish was technically the same quantum state observed from different philosophical perspectives. How was it?" "Pretentious and surprisingly filling." She picked up what might have been a spoon or possibly a tiny spatula designed by someone who'd never seen eating utensils before. "On 3? On 3, Daniel agreed. They attempted to eat their crystallized sunrise simultaneously. Daniel's dissolved on his tongue in a burst of flavors that his brain insisted were orange, even though the accompanying sensations included what tasted like nostalgia and the color purple. Beside him, Vivian made a small sound of surprise. "That's actually not terrible," she said. "I'm experiencing emotions I don't have names for. But yeah, not terrible." Around them, other delegates were tackling their courses with varying degrees of success. The Azurian chancellor had apparently absorbed his through direct crystalline osmosis. The ephemera delegation had surrounded theirs with their gaseous forms and were processing it through some kind of distributed consciousness digestion. 2 tables over, a vexed diplomat was trying to figure out if her mandibles could grip the hovering plate, which kept drifting just out of reach like it was taunting her. "So," Vivian said, her long ears tilting toward him with that focused attention he was beginning to find addictive. "Tell me about Cleveland. I've studied Earth's major cities, but Cleveland wasn't in the briefings." "That's because Cleveland's main export is people leaving Cleveland," Daniel said. "We've perfected the art of municipal self-deprecation. Our river caught fire once. Multiple times, actually. We turned it into a point of pride." "Your river caught fire?" "Industrial pollution in the 60s. The Cuyahoga River just decided to spontaneously combust. Most cities would be embarrassed. We made t-shirts." He paused as the second course materialized, a cloud of what looked like glowing mist contained in a force field shaped like a wine glass. "What about you? Where does the ruler of 47 star systems call home?" "Technically, I have residences on 14 different worlds, but home is Vivaldi Prime. It's the 3rd planet in the Vivaldi system, binary stars that create these incredible double sunsets. The whole sky turns shades of purple and gold twice a day." Her voice softened, and for a moment she looked almost wistful. "I haven't been back in 3 years. Too much to do out here, too many treaties to maintain, too many wars to prevent." "That sounds lonely." "It is," she said simply. 2 centuries of preventing conflicts, and I can count my actual friends on one hand. Most people see the crown, not the person wearing it." Daniel sipped his glowing mist, which tasted like thunderstorms and jasmine. "Is that why you sat with me? Because I didn't see the crown?" "Partially. Also because I read your personnel file and found something interesting." Her eyes glinted with amusement. "Your psychological evaluation noted that you have catastrophic difficulty with authority figures and an unfortunate tendency toward honesty in situations requiring diplomatic flexibility." "That's a very polite way of saying I have a big mouth and no sense of self-preservation. I prefer to think of it as refreshing candor." She leaned closer, and Daniel caught that ozone and flowers scent again. "Do you know how rare honesty is at my level? Everyone's calculating, positioning, Maneuvering. I once had a trade negotiation that took 3 years because neither side would admit what they actually wanted. What did they want? Access to each other's agricultural databases. That's it. But admitting it directly would have shown weakness. So instead we had 3 years of elaborate dancing around the subject, while everyone pretended it was about territorial rights and trade route access. She shook her head, her ears tilting back in what he now recognized as exasperation. I finally just asked them point blank if they wanted to swap farming techniques. They both said yes immediately and looked enormously relieved. Galactic diplomacy sounds exactly like every terrible office job I've ever had. Except the office is 1,000 light years across, and the coffee is somehow worse. She gestured at his cup, which had developed a thin film of something that might have been alive. The third course arrived, small floating orbs that changed color based on the emotional state of whoever was looking at them. Daniel's turned a nervous orange. Vivian's cycled through serene blues and purples. Mine's having an anxiety attack, Daniel observed. Is that normal? Food that judges your mental state is a bold choice, Vivian agreed, though I suppose it saves time on therapy. They ate their emotion orbs in companionable silence. Around them, conversations had resumed their normal rhythms, though Daniel caught delegates stealing glances at their table. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by intense curiosity and, in some cases, what looked like strategic recalculation. The Azurian chancellor was having what appeared to be an urgent consultation with his advisors. The Vex general had given up on her hovering plate and was watching them with compound eyes that reflected the hall's lights in fractal patterns. You've created quite a stir, Daniel said quietly. People are going to have questions. Let them question. I'm 247 years old, Daniel. I've spent most of that time doing exactly what everyone expected of me. Sitting where I was supposed to sit, negotiating the treaties I was supposed to negotiate, maintaining the alliances I was supposed to maintain. Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before. Not quite bitterness, but something close to defiance. Maybe it's time I surprised them. By sitting with the least important person at the summit? By sitting with the most genuine person at the summit, she corrected. There's a difference. The fourth course materialized, something that looked like crystallized starlight arranged in geometric patterns. Daniel picked up his fork and found himself smiling, despite everything. Despite the stares, despite the career implications, despite the fact that his brain still hadn't fully accepted that this was actually happening. Can I ask you something, he said. You've been asking me things for the last hour. Why stop now? What happens after tonight? After the summit ends and everyone goes back to their respective corners of the galaxy? Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her long ears swiveling as if listening to distant music. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. I don't know. And honestly, that's the most exciting thing I've felt in decades. The summit continued for 3 more days, and Daniel's life transformed in ways he couldn't have predicted, even with quantum probability calculations. The morning after the banquet, he'd arrived at the Cloud Palace's diplomatic wing to find a line of ambassadors waiting outside his temporary office, an office that had previously been a glorified broom closet with a desk. The Azurian chancellor wanted to discuss Earth's perspectives on trans-dimensional trade regulations. The Ephemera Collective's representatives hoped to schedule a consultation on human philosophical approaches to consciousness distribution. Even the Vex general, who'd literally stepped backward to avoid him 3 days ago, now wanted his input on cultural exchange programs. Ambassador Reeves had pulled him aside that first morning, his face cycling through expressions Daniel didn't have names for. What did you do? He'd hissed. Half the galaxy wants meetings with my assistant. I had dinner, Daniel said. Well, I had concepts of dinner. There was a crystallized moment involved. It's complicated. Now, on the final evening of the summit, Daniel stood on one of the Cloud Palace's observation decks, watching the stars wheel overhead in configurations that Earth's sky had never shown him. The palace was beginning its descent protocol, slowly dropping toward Nefara's surface in preparation for the closing ceremonies. He could feel the subtle shift in gravity, the way his inner ear protested the movement, even though his eyes saw nothing changing. Hiding from your admirers? Vivian's voice came from behind him, and Daniel turned to find her approaching across the transparent deck. Below them, lightning storms played out in slow motion, thousands of meters down, their fury reduced to silent beauty by distance. I had 17 meeting requests today, Daniel said. 17. Last week I couldn't get anyone to acknowledge I existed, and now the Quarzan ambassador wants to discuss theoretical mathematics over breakfast. I don't even understand theoretical mathematics. Neither does the Quarzan ambassador, but they'll never admit it. Vivian joined him at the railing, her silks catching the starlight. Her long ears were relaxed, tilted back in contentment. You've become unexpectedly influential. I've become a curiosity. There's a difference. He paused, watching a particularly spectacular lightning bolt fork across the clouds. They don't actually care about Earth or humanity. They care about the fact that you chose to sit with me. I'm like a restaurant that got a good review from a food critic. Suddenly everyone wants to try it, even if the food hasn't changed. Is that really what you think? Vivian turned to face him fully, and her amber eyes were serious. That none of this is real? Daniel was quiet for a moment, organizing thoughts that had been tumbling through his head for 3 days. I think you gave me something incredible. Visibility, legitimacy, a chance for Earth to actually be heard. But I also think that when you leave, when this summit ends, everything goes back to normal. The meetings will get canceled. The interest will fade. I'll go back to being the guy in the corner drinking terrible coffee. You're probably right, Vivian said, and Daniel felt something sink in his chest. About some of it anyway. Galactic attention spans are short. Next month, there'll be some other scandal or alliance to obsess over. But you're wrong about one thing. What's that? You're wrong if you think you haven't changed anything. She gestured back toward the palace's glowing interior, where the closing ceremonies were beginning. 3 days ago, Earth was an afterthought. Now, the Azurian Combine wants to open cultural exchange programs. The Ephemera Collective is proposing joint research initiatives. Even the Vex Military Command is reconsidering their assessment of human strategic value. You did that, Daniel. Not me. You. By existing near you. By being genuine when everyone else was performing. By treating me like a person instead of a political chess piece. By making me laugh about terrible coffee and rivers that catch fire. Her ears tilted forward, that gesture of complete attention he'd come to treasure. You reminded them that diplomacy isn't just about power calculations and strategic advantages. Sometimes it's about actual connection. Below them, the palace shuddered slightly as it dropped another 100 meters. The atmospheric processors adjusted with a soft hum, compensating for the pressure changes. Daniel watched the lightning storms and tried to find words for what he was feeling. I'm going to miss this, he said finally. Miss you. These 3 days have been the closest I've come to what I thought galactic diplomacy would be. Actual conversation, real connection, feeling like I mattered. Who says it has to end? Daniel looked at her sharply. You rule 47 star systems. I carry documents for an ambassador who introduces me as the human. I'm pretty sure our paths aren't designed to cross regularly. Paths can be redesigned. Vivian pulled a small crystalline device from her robes, no larger than a coin. It pulsed with soft blue light. This is a quantum link communicator, one of a matched pair. I have the other one. She held it out to him. No matter where I am in the galaxy, if you activate this, I'll know, and I'll answer. Daniel took the device, feeling its warmth against his palm. This is probably worth more than my annual salary. Considerably more. Try not to lose it in a couch cushion or something equally human. But she was smiling, and her ears were tilted in that way that meant she was pleased. Why? Daniel asked. Why give me this? Why any of this? Vivian was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. Because in 247 years, I've sat at 1,000 diplomatic functions. I've negotiated treaties that shaped the fates of entire civilizations. I've prevented wars, forged alliances, played the game so well that people write academic papers about my strategies. She turned to him, and in her eyes he saw something vulnerable and real. And in all that time, I'd forgotten what it felt like to just talk to someone, to laugh about stupid things, to be seen as Vivian instead of Queen Vivian, architect of the Treaty of Seven Suns, ruler of the Vivaldi cluster, etc., etc. I give a pretty good regular conversation, Daniel said. It's basically my only skill. It's more valuable than you know. She touched his hand briefly, her fingers warm against his skin. Keep that communicator close. Use it when you need reminding that you matter, that Earth matters, that genuine connection is worth more than all the strategic positioning in the galaxy. I'm going to use it to send you terrible jokes at inappropriate times, Daniel warned. I'm counting on it. A chime sounded through the observation deck, the call to the closing ceremonies. Around them, delegates were streaming toward the Grand Hall for final speeches and diplomatic farewells. Through the transparent floor, Daniel could see they were only a few hundred meters from the surface now, the palace settling back towards solid ground, like a dream reluctantly becoming real again. I should go, Vivian said. I have to give a speech about unity and cooperation that I've given in 17 different variations over the years. It's very inspiring and completely predictable. I'll try to look impressed. Please do. My reputation depends on it. She started to turn away, then stopped. Daniel, thank you for reminding me why I started doing this in the first place. It wasn't about power or strategy. It was about connection, about bringing people together across impossible distances. You're welcome, Daniel said, though technically, you're the one who sat with me. Best decision I've made in decades. She walked away toward the palace interior, her silks trailing starlight, her long ears catching the last rays of Nephira's setting sun. Daniel watched her go, feeling the weight of the quantum communicator in his hand. Around him, other delegates were heading inside. He saw Ambassador Reeves frantically waving, probably wanting to brief him on proper closing ceremony protocol. The Azurian Chancellor nodded as he passed, an acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable 4 days ago. The ephemera collective rippled in what his translator suggested was friendly greeting. Daniel looked down at the device in his palm, then up at the stars appearing in Nephira's darkening sky. Somewhere up there was Cleveland, was Earth, was home, and somehow, impossibly, it felt less distant than it had before. He slipped the communicator into his pocket and headed inside. The galaxy was watching, but for the first time since he'd arrived at the Cloud Palace, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. He felt real. And when he took his seat in the Grand Hall for the closing ceremonies, no longer in the corner, but at a table much closer to the center, he caught Vivian's eye across the room. She smiled, her ears tilting forward in that gesture of attention and affection, and Daniel smiled back. The galaxy might forget this moment eventually, but he wouldn't. And neither, he suspected, would she. The ceremony began, speeches flowing in a dozen languages, translated into hundreds more. Daniel listened, but mostly he watched the people around him. Beings from across the galaxy, each with their own stories, their own hopes, their own dreams of connection across impossible distances. His communicator hummed softly in his pocket. He pulled it out, saw a simple message appearing in crystalline light. Stop looking so serious. You're terrible at inspiring expressions. Daniel grinned and sent back, you're the one giving the predictable speech about unity. Touché. Dinner after this? I know a place that serves actual food instead of crystallized concepts. I thought you were leaving tonight. My schedule just became unexpectedly flexible. Perks of being queen. Daniel typed back, then yes, but I'm picking the restaurant. No more molecular gastronomy. Deal. Though I reserve the right to mock your primitive Earth palate. He slipped the communicator away as Vivian took the podium, her voice filling the hall with words about cooperation and shared futures. But now Daniel heard something else beneath the formal language, something genuine and hopeful and real. The summit was ending. The delegates would scatter across the galaxy. Earth would return to its position as a minor player in cosmic politics. But something had shifted. Some quantum state had collapsed into unexpected reality. Daniel had come to the stars looking for connection. And against all probability, in the least likely moment, he'd found it. The galaxy was vast and strange and often unkind to primitives from backwater planets. But it was also full of possibility, of moments when genuine connection cut through all the diplomatic posturing and strategic calculation. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most beautiful queen in the galaxy chose to sit with you, not despite your ordinariness, but because of it. That, Daniel thought, as Vivian's speech drew to a close and the hall erupted in polite applause, was worth the terrible coffee and all the rejection that came before. He applauded with the rest, catching her eye once more across the room. She winked, an entirely unqueenly gesture that made him laugh. The summit was over, but something else, something unexpected and wonderful, was just beginning. The end. We've reached the end of another story. Think about this. How often do we overlook people because of where they come from, what they look like, or what title they don't hold? Daniel was invisible in that great hall, not because he was worthless, but because everyone had already determined his worth before giving him a chance. And Vivian, despite all her power and influence, was drowning in a sea of people who only saw the crown, never the person beneath. Sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't conquering star systems or negotiating treaties. Sometimes it's enough to choose to truly see someone when the rest of the world finds them unworthy of attention. So ask yourself, who have you overlooked in your life? Who might be sitting alone in their corners, waiting for someone to choose genuine connection over social strategy? Subscribe to Sci-Fi Pulse for more stories exploring what it means to be human and alien in a vast, complex universe. The next story awaits you, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, remember this: sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone else has forgotten to notice. See you in the next story.